check that.
Good evening and welcome to the November Executive Scrutiny Board meeting. Do you have any apologies, please? No? Okay. Okay. Right, I have no late items, although I think item 18, we've got an updated version, haven't we, which we'll take under item 18. Any declarations of interest, please? If there aren't any, then we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October, which you all had copies of. Any comments or observations or... Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. This Derby County want to know it's going to be finished in time. Okay. Right. I say it's up to Lucy Kerr. Right. Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Right. Item 5, forward plan. You also had copies of that. Lucy.
As last time, Chair, we've got a lot of items here which appeared in this local plan, the October local plan, are being considered tomorrow by Cabinet. And the majority of the exec scrutiny boards will not have met. So it doesn't make it easy for sort of sensible scrutiny to be done. And some of these are things that were known to be on the track coming in for the last 6 months. For example, the report on flooding. The preliminary report of that came, I think it was in March. So that could have gone onto the forward plan, been seen without having to have an additional meeting by the relevant scrutiny board if they wish to do so. And I think it's an important report. But we're seeing it with less than a month's notice of when it appeared on the plan. And I don't think that is good for scrutiny. I've had discussions about this before. I know it's not required. What's happening is correct in terms of what is required under our constitution. But I don't think it makes for best governance. Thank you.
Can we have a response from officers to the points that Lucy makes, Stephen?
Chair, thank you. Well, I can certainly say that I'll pass those comments on to the Head of Democracy. And I know we've had this discussion, I think it was at the previous meeting along some of the lines, but I'll make sure they're passed on, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. Right, moving on to the Council Cabinet agenda. Let's start off with item 8, the Children and Young People Scrutiny Review Board. You've had copies of that. Is anybody wish to speak to that? John, I don't know if were you involved in that? Any comments? Anybody else? Any comments? Or... Okay, over to you, John, when you get your... Oh, sorry, no comments to make?
Nothing on top of what's there, Chair. Thank you.
Alison, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick comment as Chair of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Board. Obviously, this was a topic review on which we spent quite a lot of time and all the recommendations had unanimous support. So I thank the Council, the Cabinet member, presumably, for the responses. And I recognise that a couple of the recommendations are given some acceptance, particularly establishing an annual civic awards event, promoting information about the care system. I think it's particularly disappointing, actually, that there's no further consideration is being given to establishing a full-blown care forum in Derby, because that's clearly what our topic review found was needed. And I think in relation to the other recommendations, the responses overall are a little bit disappointing because they are generally kind of saying this isn't our concern, it relates to another body. Some of them we're aware of that and we want to get responses from the NHS and some of the other care authorities in the city, and that's what I raised at the councillors' briefing the other night with the chair of the CEO of the Integrated Care Board, that we want a better way of making recommendations to them and receiving responses to those. So we will be pursuing that along the line. But I think that given that this raises so many important issues and it had unanimous support from the councillors on the board, I think a little bit more support for some of the issues raised would have been helpful. And given that we do have an integrated care system, the cabinet member is often in forums where they could advocate, even if they cannot control, some of the recommendations we were making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Any more contributions at all? Hardiel.
Chair, I mean, referring to the response from the cabinet talks about the integrated care board and the integrated partnership board. I asked a question at the same briefing that Councillor Martin just mentioned of Dr. Chris Clayton, the Chief Executive of Derbyshire NHS Delivery and the presenter of the report. This response from the Cabinet talks about referring items and work through the new establishment. But it was clear from that meeting and subsequent meetings with the chair of the NHS Trust that the structures might have changed and they might have better representation, but they still need some sort of overarching coordination and delivery. And the significant players in that are the City Council, the NHS, and one or two other partners. And there is still going to be a question mark as to whether the new structures will do anything more than just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I think the responses here are putting a lot of weight on the new integrated care partnership and the board and all the different complicated structures we had briefings on. But that doesn't mean it's going to be sorted and be effective in the way that the report from the Adult and Social Care Scrutiny Board recommendations suggest. So I think we need to sort of either through this board or through the Adult and Health Board to monitor what has been put forward here as suggested ways of who will deal with these issues and who will pick up the recommendations. I'm not so confident that those new structures will be able to do that, no more than the current structures did.
Thank you, Hardiel. Okay, any more comments? No? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 10 of the investigation report.
Thank you, Chair. And my colleague Ashley Dunn is here, who's our expert, in case you ask any detailed questions. But and I suppose just for a point of clarity following Councillor Kerr's observation earlier on, I'm hoping this is right. I think you were referring to the Humber Basin report that came previously on flooding, which was the broader report around the Humber Basin that the Environment Agency carried out. This is the specific Section 19 report, which is an investigation into the flooding that happened in November 2019. So as local lead flood authority, we review different flood events and we can decide whether we want to carry out a much more formal investigation. And the threshold against which we make that decision is set out in 4.2 of the report. And that comes under Section 19, as I said, of the Flood and Water Management Act. So following the very significant flooding we experienced back in November 2019, I'm sure you'll all remember it very vividly, I know I do, it was agreed that we would certainly carry out a formal investigation, as Derbyshire County Council also agreed to do. And this is the report that's appended to the Cabinet document and was done through the appointment of independent experts at ACOM in this case. So as you'll remember, there was very, very heavy rainfall upstream of Derby around that time, before the events of the flood in question. And due to the catchment saturation, it resulted in substantial runoff into the River Derwent, and hence flooding in Derby. So our report covers the 12 sites that were affected by that river flooding. And obviously, as I say, we commissioned the specialists to carry out this independent investigation. And the circumstances, as you'll see in the report, is that invasive flooding was experienced on 7 commercial and 1 residential property across 5 sites. But there was considerable flooding on the highways, leading to road closures and some blackouts. So I'm really pleased to commend this report to you. I think it really sets out some valuable analysis and some real detailed insight into the causes and the impacts. So not only the rainfall and ground conditions that preceded the flooding event, but also detailing each of the individual sites with maps of water flows, and things like where they are designated a natural floodplain and how they functioned as we'd expected. I think the report also confirmed the significance of that event in 2019, so that it was a 75 to 95 year return period, and that it was certainly the highest peak flow we'd seen in the river for 85 years. It also sets out the different responsibilities of the agencies involved, which I think you'll find interesting. So the recommendations of the ACOM report are set out at 4.7 in our council report, and you'll see there are some that are very general good practice, you know, informing people about, raising awareness about flooding, and also some very technical and specific actions. As Scrutiny is aware, the mitigation for future river flooding is focused through our City, Our River project, where we work closely with the Environment Agency, and delivering of that project, it remains the biggest impact we will have on future flooding events. So while this report obviously explains that, and while some of the works for Our City, Our River weren't completed at the time, but we can also see through this report where we have now done works, and so we wouldn't see the flooding impacts that we had in 2019. The report's recommendations are very much in line with our own flooding strategy, and also it fits with our asset management approach. So the evidence that we have in here will inform our future capital programme and where Ashley and the team do future work. So most of the recommendations require a collaborative approach, as you'd imagine. So we're very working closely with the Environment Agency, with Severn Trent Water and Network Rail, and really looking at this report, looking at the areas where we're looking for assessment, where there are opportunities to make improvements, and how we might fund those. So I think, and I absolutely commend the report to you, as I said. I think the report by ACOM gives us a professional scrutiny, if you like, of the causes and impacts of the flood in 2019 with those recommended actions. And certainly it will form part of our ongoing evidence base. And I suppose the final thing is we're required to publish it on our website, as Derbyshire will do with their report. So both together, it gives us a real strong body of evidence for future planning around flooding.
Thank you, Verna. If I could ask you a question about an area that concerns my constituents and Alison's as well, and that's those in the Darley Mills area, which are a bit worried at the present time because all we have is a temporary bridge, which is there at the help of the City Council, whilst the mill owners and the government decide whether it's going to fund a permanent replacement or not. And there's only one way out of that village area and the Folly Road area for both businesses and people who live in that area. The Darley Mills area, because it's a World Heritage area, has only limited protection from those floods. And I just wondered how confident you and your right-hand man next to you are with regard to the current situation, whether we can meet the needs in the event of flooding in the Darley Mills area, the Folly Road area, Hassel Lanes area, whilst that permanent bridge is hopefully being sorted out.
Yes, Kat, and I think you yourself and Councillor Martin have been heavily involved in the meetings that we've had with the Darley residents around Folly Road, And clearly, you know, we recognise some of the issues and we recognise that we've put a temporary bridge in there. But we're working closely with the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency have met residents. We are working with them through the flood alert programmes and how we can get the messages out to residents as quickly as we possibly can so that they can take the action required. But it is a natural flooding area, and you know there are consequent risks with having a resident property there.
Yeah, I'm sure you would agree, though, that the sooner that we can facilitate a positive decision by the mill owners and the government, lottery or individual businessmen or women who may wish to contribute, to actually get their hands in their pocket and agree the financial funding so we can get on and get this permanent bridge built. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Me and my engineering teams would love to be involved in a new bridge over there. I'm sure you can well imagine.
Well, we'll do everything we can to bring that to reality. Thank you. Okay, any more other comments? Mike, and then Councillor Kay.
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's a pretty good report, actually, Chair. But what I'm interested in is, if you look at the actual report in the appendix, pages 44 to 5 have a whole list of things, but they all have a kind of, what's I saying, not very positive. It's a regular inspection consideration. How are we going to monitor whether any of it? It's all good stuff, but it needs to be done. And I'd like to know if there's going to be any kind of bring it back here or to some other body in 6 months or 8 months or a year's time or whatever to see what is actually happening before we get another 1 in 75-year flood or whatever.
Lucy.
I also thought this was a really, really useful report, and I'd been interesting also to see the report, if it's been published yet, on that the county's done regarding Matlock, because the plans within here show how the bulge of water came down the Derwent Valley, and Matlock being a smaller and possibly more vulnerable place, its challenges would have been interesting to read alongside this one. I hope that we can that Cabinet will allow the amendment of this document before it's actually published, because there are a number of little points in it that would benefit from tidying up, which I thought we could probably report back to ACOM. The most obvious one is that the various diagrams showing the maps and the flood risks, they itemise the colours in high, low, medium and very low. And it's not entirely clear as to whether that colouring is correct or the labels against those colours is correct, because it's not intuitive that you go high, low, medium, very low. So I think that's something that we could hopefully address. There are a number of other points which I'd like to share with officers on that. My main comments, though, about it is that the recommendations all relate very directly to Derby, and we are entirely dependent on what has happened upstream of us. And I think we need to be engaging with the partners that we have upstream, as we have done with the Environment Agency over a number of years, but to emphasise the importance on getting the river management upstream of us working as best it can, so that we don't get these big bulges of water coming down and threatening our central part of the city. So I don't know whether in this instance there had been fairly high river flows already, but could we have anticipated the big bulge coming and moved water out of Carsington to be able to move the top of the bulge into Carsington as it went past at that point? I don't know. There are other reservoirs high up in the Peak District which again might have been able to use in that sort of way. We also need to continue to work on the soil mechanisms for being able to hold more water. Yes, the soil was virtually full, but if we have more vegetable matter within soils, they can hold more water, and that is something that comes into the farming side of things. And there may be other opportunities for doing more water storage upstream. So it's those angles which aren't picked up in this report, but I think it might almost be worth reporting back to ICOM and see if there were reasons why they didn't include these, or we need to pick them up now and emphasise the importance of them. because we need to stop the water before it gets here, not just manage it when it has got here.
I'm sure we'd all agree we need to stop the water before it gets here. Some of these things will be beyond Werner's and all our remit about the soil, the composition of the soil, or whether we employ beavers to build dams up and around Chesterfield. But you make some important points about feeding back the concerns and suggestions, Lucy, that you made in good faith. So could you come back on Mike's and Lucy's comments, and then I'm going to take. I was going to take Hardiel, but Hardiel go on, and yours as well. Yeah.
Following on from what Councillor Clare said, I mean, some of the information in this report talks about upstream mitigation. Dam is it's more about soil and how it can retain more water. So it's a question really to say, that's one of the number of recommendations talk about upstream mitigations. How are we going to monitor and work and get the county council, who are responsible for that piece of land, how are we going to work with them to actually make sure some of the mitigations are put in place? Because that's a strong steer from this report in terms of what needs to be done to retain water more in the ground and the soil, rather than overflow into the river and then cause all the flooding, not just in Derby, but all the downstream in the Derwent. The second bit, the question was about really the bit about the large activity that's been going on at the beginning of Pride Park and Pride Way, and how that impacts or will help mitigate or not this sort of flooding in the future. So there are two questions.
Shall I take you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, similar. In the report, it says Derby had a 75 to 95 year sort of incidence of rainfall, but further upstream it was 20 to 25 years. And similar to the previous questions, I'm thinking presumably we're making the assumption, therefore, that we're going to get this sort of incidence every 20 to 25 years, because you know, we can't help. If they're going to get that much rain further upstream, we're going to flood. And also, my other question was on the rainfall return incidents. I'm assuming that we've revised in recent years. We've revised those sort of things like 1 in every 100-year floods, 1 in every 50 years floods, because obviously we're getting so much more rainfall these days, and what was considered once in a century flood, we're now getting every 2 or 3 years. So I just want the assurance that we are working on new money, in effect. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Werner, so you've got the 4 sets of queries.
I'll do my best. The first one is probably the easiest one on reporting back. So under 4.9 of the report in front of you, while there is no formal requirement under the Act to report progress on the recommendations, we are suggesting that we come back here and report back in a year's time. So hopefully that's covered off. I think you're absolutely right, and I understand and hear your points about the upstream impacts and how critical that is for the impact of flooding in Derby. I guess the important thing to say is that river management, river flooding rests with the Environment Agency. We are the lead local flooding authority, but we work closely with them. So their coordination of the two, of the Derbyshire and Derby report, is critical in this, and how they are involved and hold us all to account for that, for the river and river flooding. But we certainly would work with Derbyshire, and it's something perhaps when we come back next year we can think about including in our feedback. I've said that OCOR is the key project, and the delivery of that project is the thing that will defend us against river flooding in the future. So yes, so once those works are completed, and the works that are progressing now, that will have a direct impact on these properties being flooded again for next year. Not sure I've answered that fully there. And yes, the rainfall returns, the level of event these things are. Again, Environment Agency, we're very led by them and how they manage and it's climate data, isn't it? And it's the impact of climate change. So again, those things around 100-year, 200-year, what those things look like, they are changing all the time, and we work with them and respond to that in kind. Anything to add to that, Ashley?
No, just that during an event really, as such as this one, we are in constant contact with neighbouring authorities upstream and downstream, Environment Agency, etc. Just to understand what is coming, like you say, Councillor Care, about the bulge of water coming down. So, and we have increasingly advanced modelling of that water coming down, and it is available to the public as well. So, so we do use an increasingly sort of advanced technology really to just understand what's coming out. Helps us to respond to the event. So when it comes to closing gates at the opportune time and things like that, so we can minimise disruption where we can. Just to really emphasise as well that the report does focus on Derby and what happened in Derby, the impacts on Derby, and our response really. That's the sort of statutory remit of Section 19, the duty on the council. So it can't perhaps be outside the scope of this report to talk about impacts upstream other than just the antecedent conditions upstream. But it is something, obviously, nationally, the Environment Agency and DEFRA work on sort of driving agendas such as natural flood management, so upstream planting, holding back water in various different ways. So it is a focus nationally and locally as well.
Very much for that, both of you. If there's no more comments, then we... Lucy, you want to come back in?
Yes, Chair, I just thought it would be useful to have potentially two recommendations to this, one of which is very short and practical, which is to recommend to Cabinet to allow amendments to the report liaising with ICOM before it's published online. And secondly, to recommend to Cabinet to formally send the report to the County Council and Environment Agency, emphasising the importance we feel about action upstream from Derby that will reduce the risk of flooding in Derby.
Could the first...
Alison, you want to come in?
Could the first one be repeated, please, because I didn't catch it.
Can you repeat it, please, loud and clear, please, Lucy? Thank you.
Recommend to Cabinet to allow amendments to the report, liaising with ICOM, before it is published online. And that's just, you know, the correction of spellings and itemising which substation we're talking about, or pumping station, because it's not always clear. It's obviously written by somebody who knows very clearly what's going on, but I wasn't able to follow it entirely because of not knowing locations.
Nicola, do you want to come in?
It's up to Cabinet to agree the amendments or through...
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't think we can agree to that as a scrutiny because it's not specific enough in what amendments. Effectively, we're saying make amendments. What amendments?
Chair, I'm not asking us to make amendments, Chair. I'm asking Cabinet to allow amendments to the report before it is published online, and it would be up to Cabinet to decide who they wanted amendments to be approved by, whether it was the Cabinet member or the Director or whoever.
If we must go down this route, I think that what we're talking about isn't really amendments. We're talking about a recommendation that the report, given the quality of its presentation, is thoroughly edited and proofread before it goes online. So I think that's something that we could recommend if we felt we had to.
Nicola.
Sorry, Chair, I just think it's semantics. If there are issues with the report, I'm sure officers will correct those if there are any. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think it needs to be a full recommendation to Council Cabinet.
I'll be guided by the board, but I know that Verno is taking these on board and knows that there's a challenge to make sure that they're user-friendly and that they're comprehensive. That seems pretty straightforward because we'll hold senior officers to account if they're not. But having said that, I'll be guided by the board. If it still wishes to put a recommendation, please go ahead. That seems to, well, I haven't had a...
I think I'd like to back the second recommendation, Chair.
Okay, well, can you, Alison, repeat the first recommendation? Your recommendation.
So
It was
would you like me
Lucy's.
to repeat the second one I read out?
No, Chair, it wasn't me.
Sorry?
But I know I speak a lot. It wasn't me who made any recommendation. So it was, it was
yeah,
Councillor Kerr.
You were talking about a possible recommendation.
Chair,
Lucy?
yes, the second recommendation I had was to recommend to Cabinet to formally send the report to the County Council, to Derbyshire County Council, and the Environment Agency, emphasising the importance we feel about action upstream from Derby that will reduce the risk of flooding in Derby.
Is there a seconder for that? Any comments on that? Whether the comments or recommendations, Alison? Comments?
I can support this if the rest of the board want to support it. All I would say is that I know that the Environment Agency engage in this kind of work all the time. And recognise its importance, and there's a huge amount of debate going on about what's happening in agricultural land and planting trees, and so in a sense I feel it's a bit redundant, but I don't disagree with it.
Okay, well, it seems as though the first recommendation's fallen by the wayside, unless you want to... Okay, right, okay, so we've got Lucy's first recommendation. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. That one's failed. In terms of the second recommendation from Lucy, where there seems to be more support, those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. I think that one is passed. Have you captured the second recommendation, Steve?
Yep, thanks,
If
Chair.
you can send that to Stephen.
Councillor Kerr
Thank you
will
very much.
email me.
Okay, if there's no more comments or recommendations or pontifications about that, we'll move on to item 11, UK City of Culture Legacy, a strategic cultural partnership for Derby. Mike Brown, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides an update on a study that was considered options for developing a strategic cultural partnership for Derby. The aims of the partnership would be to develop leadership and capacity for the cultural and creative industries sectors to achieve social and economic benefits for Derby. The partnership will be a legacy from our UK City of Culture bid for 2025 and potentially set the context for a future bid in 2029 should that be progressed. The report recommends that the partnership be formed in the first instance as an unconstituted body, with the local authority providing start-up coordination and secretariat support. The initial role of the partnership will be to refine business plan priorities, operational model and financial model. As the partnership matures, the members and stakeholders may consider options to become a properly constituted body, such as a charity or community interest company. At this time, the partnership would move towards independence and become arm's length from the council. There are no financial implications to the council from the report. It is anticipated that an update report will be brought back in summer 2023, which provides details of the operational model and any implications for the council. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. I'm very supportive of this strategy with regards to the cultural partnership. I do know, though, and this is certainly not being negative at all, but we do know the major challenges that all cities throughout this country face, and Derby is included in one of those. That was because of a move towards more online shopping, out-of-town shopping. Then we had the pandemic and people working from home and not buying their sandwiches and not taking part in the city centre. And there are still many in our community who have reservations that unless with government help, and the government has got many problems, many of them of its own making, but in terms of helping cities to revive, we do need that revival of our cities. We do need far more niche shopping opportunities. We do need the empty shops being filled. Culture on its own cannot do it. Culture will play a major and massive part in that revitalisation, reinvention of our cities. And I think we all ought to get behind it and support it. But we should be pushing government, no matter who is in charge of that government now or next year or the year after, to recognise the challenges that we in this city face, and other cities as well, and rise to that challenge, because otherwise our towns and cities will die, and none of us want that, and all of us will feel the negative effects. So I totally support this, and I think we need to build on this, but we also need to recognise and address and get our representatives nationally to recognise the major challenges that councils face, and on their own cannot meet them. And part of that will come in 48 hours' time, when we know what the settlement is for cities such as Derby. We've lived for 12 years with reducing budgets, and of course we have to protect adult care and children, because statutorily we have to do. But there's many other services under threat, both the jobs and those services. And if we don't get a inflation-proof settlement, that's going to compound the many cuts and problems that we actually face. That's got to be recognised and addressed. And I try not to make that in a party political way, but it's the reality that we need to address. So let's get back to being positive. I think this report is excellent. I think I totally support it, but we need to build on it and enhance it. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously I agree with what you just said, Chair, and I obviously do think and have felt ever since I've been, well, originally first became a councillor, that the city centre in particular, but education in Derby and many of those things which we need to improve in Derby can be improved and can provide dynamism through the city, through a strong cultural sector. So I think that is very validly explained or assumed within this report. I'm just a bit confused because I know we already have strategic partnerships with cultural partners in the city. And so my question is, I'm assuming that the new proposed partnership body is one, because it says here, it says that this one will help shape policy, drive innovation, and it won't directly deliver the cultural programme. So I suppose, is that the distinction between the two bodies that will happen? And if that's the case, that's fine. But I think my concern might be that we have a lot of partnerships and bodies which take up a lot of people's time, and they will be the same people, you know, the director of quad or whatever will be on both of these bodies. And so I suppose if you could just explain a little bit more, very briefly, because I know but I'd be interested to know, you know, why particularly you felt this partnership was needed, and what can it bring that couldn't emerge from the existing strategic cultural partnerships in the city?
Thank you. In terms of the existing partnership, it's the Strategic Culture Group, which is made up of the CEOs of cultural organisations in the city. The proposal for the new partnership is to build a different type of board, which isn't just solely made up of cultural partners, it's made up of stakeholders who are leaders within the city who can champion the role of culture within a range of contexts. So the existing Strategic Culture Group would be a delivery mechanism for the culture strategy. The new partnership would help to shape that strategy and those cultural priorities for the city and ensure that it sits within the context of economic and social regeneration for the city.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Nicola, and then Hardiel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for bringing us back to what this paper is actually about, which is the UK City of Culture legacy and the fantastic work that was undergone during that period of time, despite our Chair's non-political, rant. Unfortunately, I would beg to differ in terms of the cultural successes that this is drawing out on and what we can lead going forward. I just want to thank the officers for their support in this, and I think it's a real positive for the city. We all know that the times are changing, we can't live in the past forever, and that the cities will have to develop a cultural offer that brings people into the city because of changing times. So, thank you.
If by a rant means defending my city and making sure it doesn't die on its knees, I'll rant till the cows come home. And hopefully my colleagues will when we're back in control of the city from next May. Right, Hardiel, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is timely in terms of trying to get a wider partnership to consider how we can promote culture within the city, not only for economic benefits, but social benefits. So I welcome this report and the recommendations to go away and to look at option appraisals. And I'd be interested to see which one is seen as the most effective to deliver. So totally support this report and the recommendations. But like most things, and as you, Chair, mentioned, a lot of this, we can be all fighting fit and ready to do the thing on the ground here, but without the funding, it's going to be a bigger challenge than with funding. And that is a big question mark, not only on culture, but many other aspects of delivery at a local level. And it's right for you to say, Chair, and it's not something about ranting, it's about the reality. The reality is tomorrow there will be a budget set, and we know that whichever options are looked at, they don't look too good. They don't look too good for public services, local authorities, and our future after 12 years of austerity and cuts. And I hope that something positive comes out of tomorrow, but I won't be holding my breath. So this is a good step in the right direction. We need to be ready to do the job, but that's going to be limited because funding inevitably makes the difference at the end of the day.
Sorry, Chair, can we talk on your
Yes, you certainly can.
Sorry, just before you shove that through for us all and nobody can comment. Yeah, I do believe we do have the right to speak, is that right? Oh, brilliant, thank you. So, sorry, could you just repeat your recommendation and for what we're saying here is funding? Because I think this paper is specifically saying it's not about funding, it's about creating a partnership board with partners outside of the council. So the partners that are independent organisations, etc., to bring people together. It's not, this paper isn't specifically about funding. It actually already accepts £15,000 worth of funding from the Arts Council to do this work. So I think we're trying to make something, I appreciate you will always make political points, that's your, your prerogative, but this paper, bringing it back to the fundamentals of what this is asking, it's creating a board which is bringing partners and everything to discuss opportunities going forward. It's not actually asking us to do anything. Am I correct in that, officers?
Well, I've still put the recommendation, and I thank you, actually, Nicola. You've helped me add a little bit to it, which makes it even more pertinent. So this is the recommendation. Cabinet lobbies government for adequate funding to make sure these proposals succeed, as well as addressing the challenges facing city council budgets, particularly this year, that could undermine these proposals. So I've got a seconder and recommend. Yeah.
Could we put the word future? Because we're not looking for this money this year. We're looking for this money in 2 or 3 years' time when we've got our structures in place. So it would be future funding is available.
think it may have been Ian Fulliger, Chair, who was due to lead on the two next reports.
Can anybody improvise for him?
I shall try.
Well done.
I mean, may I suggest that perhaps we sort of take item 12 and 13 together, because they are very much interlinked. If that's
Can I just ask the committee, are committee happy for us to take item 12 and item 13 together? Does anybody object? No? All in favour? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah. So both of these reports focus on the private housing sector in Derby, and in particular the impacts that has. There is quite a lot of detail within the reports themselves and in subsequent attachments that link obviously poor private sector housing to impacts on health and the wider social society. And it's a piece of work that has been undertaken by colleagues both in the housing strategy team, the housing standards team and the public health teams within the council. And as I say, Chair, there are a number of recommendations sort of associated with it, most of which are to go out to seek some further information and evidence via a public consultation, which will then allow officers to pull together the comments that have been received and to move forward on some options and alternatives around addressing some of the concerns that have been raised in the reports. If that helps, Chair, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you very much. It's interesting with regard to these that I met up with Mike Kay, Paul Clark and Ian Fulliger a number of months ago, and at that time I had a bit of a battle to convince them to take on board the registered landlord scheme, because I was saying other towns and cities throughout the country do this. We could or should be charging a few £100 a year, which would pay for the additional officers, because I think at that moment in time we had only six officers to do enforcement, where I think Nottingham, somebody will correct me, was something like 66. And so we worked out a figure, probably about 300,000 that was needed to be raised so we can pay for the officers. And it was about getting them skilled and getting trained up. So I'm quite pleased the current administration has pinched our ideas and put them into effect, but we do need to build on that. We do need to alter the local plan to make it more tighter. We do need Article 4 enforcing as soon as possible, because we want to raise the standard of public housing in this city. We want to make sure those landlords are accountable. It's not just a quick profit and a quick buck, but they have good quality housing, both for the tenants, but also for the communities within which they're placed. And we need to make sure that these houses in multiple occupation and rented accommodation are not turning into areas where there's a heavy concentration, but they are where they're needed, but throughout the whole city. So it's about the right sort of accommodation, the right quality of accommodation, and making sure they fit harmoniously in with the local communities. And I think we'd all support that and be on board. Any more comments from other people at all? Quite a few. I'll take Alison, Mike, Hardiel and Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I do welcome this report. It does, as you said, I agree with what you said. It focuses on extremely important issues, very concerning issues. I noticed that we have got a few categories of damp and mould growth in the city, and earlier today I saw a headline, tragic headline news on the national news, was that a 2-year-old boy had been found in the coroner's inquest to have died because of prolonged exposure to mould in very, very poor housing conditions. This wasn't in Derby, but it does illustrate how important it is to get on some of these conditions. And it also reiterates the point that basically councils need to have the power and the finances to be able to intervene in some of these cases and to raise the housing standards in the city, because we are on some kind of absurd path back to the 19th century. and it is completely wrong. And we do live in one of the most unequal cities in the country. And so we must all, I'm sure everybody in this room would want for us to maintain a focus on housing conditions in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Mike, Hardy and Lucy. Is anybody else to add to my list that I haven't included on that? Okay, so Mike, Hardy and Lucy. Thank you.
Well, I think I should just thank Alison because she saved me quite a lot of breath there. It's disgraceful in the 21st century that a child in Manchester can directly die as a result of mould in rented housing. I fully support all the recommendations in this report, and I agree with you and Alison. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mike. Hardiel and then Lucy.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think nationally there's been a report of a young boy, 3 years old, who died because of mould and private rented property, which was below standards. And this report really highlights one of the two things that make a massive difference to families. One is housing and the quality of housing, whether it's owner-occupied or rented. And the second is employment, but employment with adequate funding to survive, which we all too well know at the moment. Many families, working families, are not able to do that, and food banks have gone through the roof in terms of the number of people wanting support even though they're working. So this report, I think, and the recommendations are really important. They're not new. I mean, I think some of the facts about health inequality and how it can impact on the life chances of individuals in different parts of the city. And it talks about the wards where it's more prevalent, Sinn Féin, Arboretum, Normanton, and wards like that, Derwent, where it makes a massive difference. So I really welcome this report. I think the bit that matters is about what actions are going to be taken to make it happen. And I'm not sure if the officers can actually point me in the direction of what that means, because the findings, although very helpful and clear, are not new. Health authorities are tackling them through public health, through the health service, through our council's responsibilities are really important. It's how to make it happen. How do we make sure that the standards in those private or owner-occupied properties is improved and tackled? And is there anything in this report that actually enables that to happen? I mean, I'd be interested to know the response to that from officers, and then await what more can be done on this.
Thank you, Hardiel. Lucy, and then Rachel would like to respond. Lucy.
Yeah, two things, Chair. Firstly, I really welcome this report as well, but I recognise that it's based on quite a limited number of properties that have been inspected, and we're extrapolating from that quite small base. And I think one thing we need is to actually identify not that we have a problem, which is clear that we do, but which particular properties we need to go to pick away and reduce the size of this problem. Now, we haven't got the resources to knock on every door and say, can we have a look at your house, please, and check it's okay, because clearly we haven't. But there are other organisations who do knock on doors and check out what's going on behind them. You know, our fire and rescue service go in and visit people and check on fire safety. They will also be able to see other things once they're in the property. A fair number of the private rented properties have an agency that they're working through. Can't we expect the agency to actually do some sort of oversight of the properties that they have on their books? And I think if that's not included in the licensing strategy that's being proposed, then I would hope that it could be. And there was the other organisation that I felt may have a role in this is actually Community Action Derby, because they can raise the need and the potential for help for properties, and they have worked with a lot of organisations where there are people who will go in on a voluntary basis to help somebody else or to visit somebody who needs help. And I think we need to engage with those people and have a mechanism by which they can feed in to our knowledge base so that we know where, and this is the second point, Chair, we know where we most need to target the limited funds that we have to be able to make the biggest impact. So there's 2 points, Chair, and I would think they're things we could recommend to Cabinet to do.
Yeah, just before I bring Rachel and Nicola in, I think you do make some good points. There are other agencies that we have, and whilst their roles are more focused, like in childcare, where there are various workers often going in, but not always going into houses, but where they can and do see concerns about conditions that could affect the health, then hopefully that's in part of their training and requirements of their assessment to make sure that's reported back to the right agencies who can take action. Do you want to come in now, Rachel, or do you want me to take Nicola first? Which do you... shall I take you first, Nicola, and then you can respond to... Is it...
Mine is more of a point than a question.
Do you want to come back then, Rachel, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologise for Ian Fuller not being here. He usually is always here at these meetings, so I'm surprised why he hasn't come. There must be a good reason. I'm sure he's not here. Just to reinforce some of the comments that were made by Mike and answer questions that have been asked here, trying to tackle the conditions in the private sector are extremely onerous on a local authority. The powers that we have to do that are limited and our resources are limited. So this work has been about understanding the nature of the problem in our city and then working out what the best ways and which tools in our toolbox we can use to try and make an impact on them. So the answer to the first question about the what, obviously a licensing scheme is a really effective way, and many authorities have done licensing schemes, both a selective licensing scheme and also particularly targeted licensing schemes to force private landlords largely to really look after their properties more effectively. If they don't, there's clearly some enforcement action needs to be taken alongside that. So it is an action-orientated report. The second report, the first report gives us the data, the second report gives us an action point to go forward with that work. In terms of that understanding of the sector and the level of properties being inspected to give you a picture of it, it's a tried and tested model, but absolutely I can reassure councillors that the level of integration we have across our public services in the city, where we're sharing information across our voluntary and community sector, so Community Action Derby, our fire and rescue teams, our social care workers who are going into properties, to feed that information back, we're getting more qualitative information as over and above the quantitative information. That is part of our operating model to try and use that. So all of that intelligence we get about property condition, we're trying to use that as part of this work. But I don't want to pretend to members that this will fix the problem, because it is a problem that is growing, and it's a problem that is national, and it is particularly difficult. And we are taking some proactive work here, but it won't be on its own enough to solve the problem completely, because it obviously is the private sector we are trying to enforce against here.
Yeah, I think we probably accept that, Rachel. I think you're obviously taking on board the concerns that we all have about what's happening in Rochdale, that it could happen in, sadly, other towns and cities. We just want to try and make sure that Derby's not one of them. And I think we all have a responsibility. Nicola.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel has covered a lot of what I was going to say. This is private sector. Let's forget our Derby Homes and other things amongst the city are actually very good at these our housing. So it is about encourage. And if you look at if you've read the report, recommendation 4.9 details exactly what it's all about. It is in collaborative working, empowering people to raise their concerns, deal with those issues, and tackle those rogue renters, if you like. I think from my point of view, it's not all. I don't think we should tar this. It's not everybody in the city. There are some excellent landlords across the city, but we know there are issues, and it's about empowering those residents that are in those properties to challenge it, to support them with that, and make sure that they've got the support behind them. And I just think it's a positive report, whether it was your great idea or obviously great minds think alike, Chair.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Nicola. I'm blushing. Thank you. Hardy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that this report is focusing on owner-occupied and private sector rented accommodation, and that's where the problems are. Unfortunately, council-owned properties are in the minority, and they are good standard, but we don't have enough of them. And the majority of the people of Derby City, the people we represent here, are being affected by this in a negative way. Health inequalities are increasing. as we've heard recently, the gap between people living in Alistair and people living in Normanton is widening in terms of mortality and health prospects. So there are some very good points in here. I think we need to sort of support that, but the actions, how are we going to make sure we make a material impact on the private sector in terms of the quality of housing? So the one thing Rachel, the officer mentioned was about selected licensing. And if that's a recommendation in here, I would want to sort of really totally, I think we should support that as a board. Licensing, selected and more generic licensing of the private sector in particular is really important. It's something that we've been calling for many, many years, but financial costs have got in the way in the past of actually implementing licensing. I remember Mike's here. Many years ago, we had talks about how to do this, and the funding was too high. But if there's been a better way forward to do that, I would strongly recommend that. I think we should put a recommendation to support selective or wider licensing so that we can actually monitor and more effectively intervene with the private sector in terms of the condition of housing that the large number of people that have to live in Derby City. So that's something that I think we should sort of, I would propose, Chair, we put as a recommendation. And the second bit is that how can we bring back a plan? Can this board request the Cabinet to bring back a plan of how the actions will be followed? Actions that can be taken by the City Council, but more importantly, as the earlier papers mentioned, is a partnership working. How can we how the coordination between health, other organisations, public protection organisations, and the City Council can coordinate their work to actually tackle this problem, which has been a long-standing one. One, that we support selective licensing or wider licensing of the implementation of a selective licensing or a wider licensing of particularly the private sector housing stock, and the resources to make sure that the monitoring and the implementation, interventions can be effective in making a difference on the health inequalities and social status of our residents. And secondly, the Cabinet to work with other partner agencies about how we can actually provide material interventions that will make a difference to the health inequalities which are widening rather than reducing in the City of Derby.
Yeah, it might be useful just to clarify the situation then before you consider those extra recommendations that Councillor Dinser has just proposed. So, just to be clear, selective licensing and additional licensing is obviously one of the options that will come out of this and can be considered by Council probably at a future date. The recommendation in the report, certainly the item 13 report on private housing conditions, that talks about us going out for a consultation to get some evidence base for then officers to look at and bring back and work up some proposals that will certainly include selective licensing and or additional licensing. And as part of that process, just to sort of address the second point that I think Councillor Dinser was making, and Rachel has already covered off largely, you know, as part of that consultation exercise, we will be actively seeking comments and responses from all stakeholders. You know, so that will be landlords forums, that will be tenants groups, it'll be community groups and agencies involved, you know, in visiting properties. So Councillor Kerr, for example, mentioned Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service. So whether or not we need to consider Councillor Dinser's recommendations just yet, I'm not so sure. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think Mike's suggesting that implicit in this report are some of the things that we're trying to come to the conclusions before we've actually asked. I don't know what Hardle, do you want to come back to either
yes,
alter that or explain?
I totally understand Mike Hayes' comments about what the process is, about how we're going to get feedback and consultation and the options of a selective licensing. Personally, there's been enough evidence, and if we are part of the process of giving feedback on this, there is strong evidence from my perspective, and I'm sure Mike, from our discussion in the past decade or so, will confirm that there has been a strong need to have some sort of type of licensing. Now, the type, it may be sort of through consultation, but strongly supporting some sort of licensing mechanism that can better monitor, as part of the recommendation, the where the interventions can be actually targeted is needed. And I think we should, as a board, be putting our support of this report, but also some of the things that we think that strongly are needed. It'll be reinforced or not, or confirmed by the wider consultation, but we can be saying something here more positive and proactive in terms of what the findings and the outcomes of this report already tell us.
Technically, we might want to, think about, bearing in mind what Michael actually said,
it's a bit getting the horse before it's bolted type scenario, isn't it, at the end of the day? That's in predetermination. That's the point of this one for me and this thing. But I think from, as I've said before, on the within this report at 4.9, some of the points that you were raising there are covered off with what this is recommending. So the report therefore recommends interventions, options to address these health inequalities. Some of these recommendations will benefit occupants of all housing tenures, and then there are 5 specifics: encouraging further collaborative working across the health and care and housing partners; 2, working with partners to simplify referral routes from health and care services to council and community support services; 3, ensuring advice and support is readily available and residents seeking to make home improvements; 4, ensuring information is readily available to private tenants and landlords on their rights and responsibilities; and 5, maximising opportunities emerging from the Renters Reform Bill. So I think I actually agree. There's no disagreement in what's being suggested. It's just timings and making sure we're doing it in the right order.
Heidi.
The purpose of this report, 1.2 of the report, says to recommend actions to address issues of health inequality brought on by poor quality private sector housing in Derby based on the findings of this report. We have the report in front of us. The Cabinet will be looking at actions. There are some actions in here, but surely we as a board can actually, at this point, on the purpose of this report is to recommend actions to address issues of health inequality. That's exactly what we've been talking about and debating. And there are some things that can be done, and we can sort of put forward our ideas now rather than waiting for the cart or the horse or whatever else we're trying to wait to find out about. The report itself, the purpose is about actions. Surely we should be able to do that now rather than it can be added to from whatever comes from findings and discussions with other partners wider than the more significant partners that Mike mentioned.
So, in terms of recommendation, are you still wanting to go ahead with the recommendation that you had, Hardil? Do you have a seconder for that?
Could we have the recommendation again, please, Chair? Can we have the recommendation again, please?
Chair, I think it's evolved, I believe, really. Councillor Zinser, if you wanted to, you had 2 parts to it before.
Can you spell it out quite?
The findings of this report demonstrate that health inequalities are made worse through the housing conditions of particularly the private sector. And one of the ways that has been considered or talked about is that having selective or some other part of licensing to monitor the conditions of our private sector housing to allow interventions to be added would be welcome and support the findings of this report of tackling health inequalities. At the same time, to make that effective, we need proactive action from significant agencies like the Health, City Council, other partners like police and the Fire Rescue Service to take actions and then recommend to the Council Cabinet to bring back a report about how those actions can be delivered to tackle the widening health inequalities in the city, which have not reduced over the last many years or decades.
Is that helpful, John?
Yes. 5 minutes. Yeah, I'd second that. Yeah.
I'll give this is, you still want, this is two separate. Let me read out a rough version then. The Executive Scrutiny Board supports wider licensing, particularly in the private rented housing sector, to allow monitoring and intervention where required, to improve health inequality, and also recommends that a proactive action plan be put together to will explain how those actions will be delivered to improve health inequalities.
Okay.
Multi-agency.
Right, okay. So
No, I'll start, but Nigel's here for backup. So the National Bus Strategy was published in March 2021, and that set out the requirements for local areas to formally establish a constituted enhanced bus partnership. So Cabinet approved our notification to the Department of Transport for our intention to establish our own partnership back in June 2021. And I guess it's important for me to really clarify that without an enhanced partnership in place, it's very unlikely, and this was very clear in the national strategy, that we would attract further government funding, both ourselves and bus operators, and also that it could impact on other transport-related funding for the council. So since June last year, we've been working through the guidance and details as they've slowly emerged from the Department for Transport, and that included the submission of a bus service improvement plan, affectionately known as a BSIP, and Cabinet approved the draft BSIP in October last year. The Enhanced Partnership Scheme, which details what the EP is going to do and sets out the governance, and that BSIP have been through public consultation, where they have been positively received. And a majority of people were in support of the proposed target measures, where we will hold the EP to account, things like journey times, reliability, punctuality, passenger growth and customer satisfaction. Now we've recently, only very recently, in the last few weeks, had confirmation from the Department for Transport that our EP scheme, our Enhanced Partnership Scheme, has passed all the DFT requirements. But it's only once we have that formally constituted partnership in place that we'll get access to the indicative funding of just over 7 million that was allocated to us by the DFT to our BSIP that we put forward. So within that, the governance of that enhanced partnership, the City Council acts as the accountable body for that funding, but the oversight and delivery of that bus service improvement plan is held by the enhanced partnership. And the governance structure of the enhanced partnership is through a board and forum. And again, all these documents are on our website. So the board is the decision maker and be responsible for the future content. It would look at variations and revocations. And the forum is there to provide those opportunities to discuss all kinds of issues that affect the network, looking at consultation, how we build consensus, dealing with and engaging with various stakeholders, and making formal recommendations to the board. The members of the board have equal voting rights and can determine spend in line with national strategy, but the council holds a power of veto, which it can exercise if it believes that there's any anti-competitive implications or decisions that may not be in the public interest. So I hope that gives you some comfort. So this report, the main thrust of this report is to seek a confirmation of the establishment of that enhanced partnership and to allow us to put a notice to that effect on our website, which the DFT require us to do. There is also another part to the report which is seeking acceptance for a very small amount of local transport funding. Now, we've been allocated 25k, so as I say, it is small, and we propose to use this on 2 bus trials. So it will be in line with the national strategy, and the idea is that you're testing small bus integrated with big bus. So this is a small local bus services, then how that links with the bigger services that go down the arterial routes and into the city centre, etc. There's some really strict criteria around. I know it's a small amount of funding, but there are very strict criteria around it. So we've been very pragmatic. We're proposing 2 trials. One around Darley Abbey and Alice Street and the links with Park Farm, and one around Spondon to link to the edge of the village to the centre. And we're exploring those trials with Derbyshire Community Transport. We do think it's the best use of this modest funding, and I think one of the most important things is that when we've run those trials and we've analysed the evidence that we get back, it will really provide good information that we can drive through the enhanced partnership. And also something which we see as a real bedrock that can drive all our future decision making through the enhanced partnership is that we will carry out a network review when we've constituted that partnership and we've got hold of the indicative funding, which will be very important for all of us to understand the bus network. And I guess the final point, Chair, is just to say, as it states in the report, that of course there are, with the potentially coming of a mayoral combined authority, that will become the local transport authority for the area. So we can expect that enhanced partnerships and BSIPs will be something that will be looked at as part of that transition as the combined authority is created. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Verna. Just before I bring my colleague John Whitby in, who I know feels very passionately and rightly so about his the bus service of Mackworth, which was decimated. Just want to talk about what was the 17A. Over 35 years, I had 4 battles to save the 17A. 5 battles. 4 I won, 1 I lost, and that was the last one, and that was Trent Barton. Post-COVID, they withdrew the service completely, leaving many elderly, infirm, those without cars, high and dry in the village without any access to the main road. So I welcome these proposals, and I think it's important, and I've spoken to Nigel about this. We'll make sure local people know about it, and it is a success. It was only a few hours ago I was talking to 3 residents of the sheltered housing complex in the Leylands, Broadway, who will also be connected, as well as the village in Alistair and other parts, who really welcome these proposals, and we want to make sure that they're introduced as soon as possible. They remained sceptical, but I assured them that I know that Nigel is behind it. We hope to have it integrate in operation by the end of January at the latest, which will offer some respite to make sure those elderly and infirm can get to see their doctor, they can get to see their friends at the local coffee shop, they can get to the local hairdressers where they previously were denied that. And so we owe it these different communities in Derby, both in Spondon and in Darley and other areas. Hopefully these can be used as a pilot to work elsewhere for our communities. Over to you, John, because I know we now need to save Mackworth as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously I'm fully supportive and delighted for the residents of Darley Abbey and Spondon that something creative is being considered for them. But clearly there's a third service that's been axed in recent times. And obviously I'm just wondering where the support for the people of Mackworth, New Zealand, Ashbourne Road is. Thank you.
Verna, Nigel?
I'll take that. From the local transport fund funding, we're not allowed within the criteria to resurrect services that have failed commercially. So we can't put a service into Mackworth that links to the city centre, which is the subtlety of the services that we're looking at here are very much within community links, and then allowing people to transfer from small bus to big bus, and that's the language of the strategy. Now, if there's a subsidiary scheme, if these schemes work and the funding, we can make the funding work, if there's something we can do in Mackworth that links up the wider area of Mackworth to a district centre, and then maybe into a transitional route of an existing service on the main road, that would fit into the criteria for further expansion. But we can't resurrect a service from the city centre direct to Mackworth.
Yeah, I'll bring John back in because there's an extra challenge, as we know. If the Highways England go ahead with A38, people in Mackworth particularly will be completely isolated, and that would be a good time then to trying to link those good people of Mackworth into a service. John, over to you again.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think anyone necessarily is trying to recreate exactly the same bus service as before. It is just a service that runs down or up Ashbourne Road that's more frequent than 1 an hour. It's one of the busiest routes in Derby, clearly, into the city centre. I mean, most of the other major routes in Derby have got 4 or 5 bus routes an hour. The services now, Ashbourne has got 1. And the other thing is, whether it failed commercially is questionable. That's not what Arriva told me. I don't know. The truth of that, they told me it was commercially viable before the pandemic. I see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be commercially viable again. But I'm not suggesting that the bus goes exactly the same route as the previous number 9. We just need a more frequent bus service up one of Derby's busiest roads, please.
Yeah, I think you just come back to the point that if we're running a service which links into a city centre on a main route, that's a competitive service, and that's outside of the scope of the funding and the capabilities that we have, and actually puts us into a competitive position. That's very, very difficult legally for a local authority to get into that position. So I have great sympathy with what you're saying, and I know we've spoke before about Mackworth and Mackworth service decimation and the lack of services on Ashbourne Road. We would like to do something, but it's partly legally, it's partly about the conditions of grant, and it's about the amount of funding. I mean, the small services we're looking at here won't run all day, every day. They're aimed at costing a couple of £100 or a little bit more than that per week, depending on how we treat the fares. We are working with the charitable arm of Derbyshire Transport as well, again, to try and keep the cost down. If we move into sort of big bus type scenarios on main routes, that's a lot of money, and we've got £25,000 to play with. So the only hope I can potentially offer is in the network review and building a strategy through the bus service improvement plan and with the work of the EP that actually shows where the community needs are, and we are very keen to do a full review that's not based on commerciality entirely, but is based on community need. And that provides then an investment plan for if an operator wants to run a service, these are the structure of services we should be trying to run first. And Mackworth would be genuinely somewhere near the top of that list. It's a big community which is massively underserved at the moment.
Can I suggest that you two meet fairly urgently outside of this meeting to look at the scope of what needs to be addressed? Would that be useful, John?
Absolutely. I'm always happy to discuss.
Yeah. Thank you. So if you guys can be in touch. I've got a number of people who wish to speak, and then I'm going to close the debate down because we've got a massive agenda still. I've got Nicola and I've got Harjul, and then a very quick one, Lucy, if you don't mind, after that. Please.
Thank you, Chair. We're in danger of agreeing on something here for a change. I would actually echo what Councillor Whitby was saying there. I think when we're looking and referring to Spondon, for example, this challenge that the Spondon flyer wasn't economically viable or commercially viable at a time in the middle of a pandemic, post a pandemic, and then a service wasn't brought back and was only brought back intermittently and not running to time, and people couldn't rely on it. As we all agree, climate change is a big issue for this city, and the fact that people can't rely on buses and haven't been able to, and therefore increases the number of cars, whether that be down Ashbourne Road or down the A52, because people couldn't rely on the bus services, then, you know, it does question for me this competitivity clause or issue, because ultimately as a Spondon resident, my guts at the moment, based on the conversation I've had with and I will say it, Trent Barton, who have the service there, I feel that they've let Spondon down, they've let the residents down. They haven't, and I think the implications of what they've done has had a major effect on mainly on Alistry and Spondon and potentially Mackworth, because there is an older demographic in those areas, and their gold passes are what they've been using, and that was their lifeline to the wider world, and it's, to me, causing a lot of social isolation and social and issues that is not the best time to be doing that in this situation that we're all in and we're facing right now. So, you know, for me, this is a major thing. I hope that we can get funding for things going forward. I think it's a priority. I just want to clarify that gold card users will be eligible to use their gold cards on the services that are being temporarily. And my concern is, as with anything, unless we can make sure it's reliable and people can rely on it and they will use it if they know it's going to be there.
Nigel, do you want to come back?
Yeah, there is a difficulty with gold cards with the type of registration. Now, it can be done, but it is likely to cost several £1,000s because the scheme has to be changed, and the scheme is run jointly, well, it's administered by the county council on our behalf. So there's legal fees to pay to change the scheme, and the current assessment is that's about £5,000 to £6,000. Plus, it'll probably take about 6 months because there's a consultative effort, etc., that goes with it. More of an industry consultation than a public one. So one of the things that we've been looking at is whether or not these services, because they're run under the charitable side, whether or not they can be run for free as an introduction, and then the actual trips can be subsidised quite heavily. So there are some community transport operations in the city and in Derbyshire indeed, running quite small journeys for £5 a trip. We're seeing if we can maybe make that £2, for example, just to cushion against the gold card issue, because otherwise we could be waiting 6 months to launch a trial, and that could be the only blocking factor. And actually, we might be able to do something that's free introductory and then keeps the fare at a very, very small level. I think the sense that we have, and this is partly guided by some of the local councillor feedback as well as some of the public feedback, is that it's not so much the price sensitivity, it's more about trying to deal with some of the isolation and connect people to their local communities, and then maybe give them the opportunity for a big bus, whether that's the 9s or whether it's the Alistry or the 6s.
Thank you, Nigel. If I can ask my two colleagues, Hardiel and Lucy, to be fairly brief, because we've got a full agenda to get through. Hardiel and then Lucy, a couple of minutes each, please.
I mean, clearly this small bit of funding, the 25,000, the 0.025 million, is written here, is small money to sort of just do what and welcome in the sense. But the bigger picture is, as Councillor Ralston mentioned, Trent Barton and other bus companies have let people of Derby down in many parts of the community when they've, for commercial viability or not, they've stopped many routes. And I know a number in the Normanton area that were stopped and had negative impact on our communities and isolated many. Is there anything, if this partnership develops and progresses, that we can actually do anything about the subsidies that we could put in where commercial viability didn't allow it? And is there potential to do that once we unlock the £7 million? That's part of the partnership's purview. The other thing on 4.15, so if you can respond to that, that'd be helpful. 4.15, it says that the East Midlands Mayoral Combined County Authority will become the local transport authority if that legislation passes. So does that mean we lose control or influence as a city council in terms of what happens in our city?
Mine's brief. The first recommendation is to approve the council's enhanced partnership plan. It isn't included in background papers, and I don't know where to find it. I hope that Cabinet do know where to find it and have read it before they approve it. But this isn't the only paper we've got tonight where references documents that we haven't even got mentioned as background papers, and it's something that I'd like more accessibility to.
Okay, so on the working of the EP and the arrangements around the plan and where it can lead to in terms of improvements in services and potential subsidies, there's £2 million of the 7 million indicative funding is revenue funding. So it's that type of funding that we need to be able to provide support into services. £2 million is not going to make a massive difference in terms of supporting Big Boss. It's because it's not £2 million a year; it's £2 million over 2 years. But what it does, and we've got to work through the final details with DFT, because until we form the EP, they won't go through the final details with us of the funding. But we are anticipating that we will get some element of ticketing support. So that'll be support for customers for certain sorts of tickets. Now that could be based on younger employed people, for example, who don't currently fall into a concession. It could be based on some form of daily capping, family tickets maybe, or it could be geographically located in the city, but to try and provide some sort of support for passengers. Direct support into buses needs a lot of money, but the EP is the only way that we're ever going to access it. I can't sit here and tell you we will get it, but if we don't have the EP, we won't even have a role to play. So in terms of influence commercially, that's very difficult. We're back to the source legislation. Although the National Bus Strategy is new, the source legislation from the 1980s deregulates the market and basically pushes local authorities hard to the margins, gives us very limited legal powers. However, it is a partnership. We do have obligations on each side, which are statutory rather than as they have been in the past, quite soft and by very gentle agreement. So they do need things from us, and we have some obligations to invest in infrastructure. We might be able to get some sort of concessions based on that in terms of services. But I can't say that it's going to change the world, because the source legislation is still the same. In terms of the local transport authority and control, it's an interesting one. It depends on, there's multiple powers that make up a local transport authority. Effectively, the strategic control will go to a combined authority if it's formed, and all four of the contributing top-tier authorities will be ceding some degree of strategic powers. It does, of course, create that opportunity for funding for a strategic package, and it does take out, or potentially takes out, some of the cross-boundary frustrations that we currently have. We should get some economies of scale. Hopefully, it provides both a little bit more political muscle, if I can use that phrase, and some additional financial muscle, which just might change some of the commercial balances. And you've got to look at places like Manchester and what the mayor there has been able to do, what they've done in the West Midlands across some of the transport. And there's more of a hope for better integration, not just between bus travel, but between bus, rail, etc. as well. So there is some powers to cede, but not all powers are ceded. But there are hundreds of powers that make up a local transport authority, and they'll be negotiated through the transition period and beyond. In terms of if we move on to Councillor Kerr's point about the plan, I think most of the plan documents are attached on the consultation link, but I will check just in case they're not. But they should have been, the background papers should be there, because that's the plan that was consulted on is the plan that we're seeking for approval, which includes the enhanced partnership and the workings of that partnership. I apologise if they're not there. They should be there.
Thank you, Nigel. Right, moving on to item 15, Community Managed Libraries Update. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Public libraries offer a range of valuable services and help connect local people with other important activities. This is even more important in the circumstances our communities find themselves in currently, with growing importance on local opportunities to connect with others and for access to advice and support services. Library services should co-design and co-create their services with active support and engagement and participation of the communities, so services are as accessible as possible, and that can be in the context of the available resources. To this end, the Community Managed Library Review has taken place, and this has been led on by one of our excellent third sector partners, Community Action Derby, who we are very pleased to have been working with to engage with their expertise. This report seeks the necessary approvals for sufficient time and funding to be provided whilst the findings of the CML review are considered. Derby Help and Advice are delivering the services of 10 CMLs, and this report requests approval for grant funding of £104,000 for the period of 1st of December to the 31st of March for DHA to continue to operate the CML provision. A further report will then be brought to Cabinet that will seek approval for recommendations for post-March delivery that come from understanding the implications of the current financial position and the outcomes of the CML review. And this will enable us to communicate as soon as possible future proposals, and this will allow informed decisions about the longer term provision of CMLs to be made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. It's no criticism at all of officers, because I understand the very difficult position that you're in with regard to libraries, but a lot of those that operate the libraries and also those that use them will be very fearful that we're obviously funding's being found for a matter of weeks or a few months, and then looking post-March what the financial position is going to be. But as we talked earlier, we know that the Chancellor will be announcing his cuts in 48 hours' time, and everybody fears the worst. Hopefully the worst isn't realised, but obviously those that run the libraries and those that use the libraries want to know at the earliest opportunity what the implications are for them, both now and post-March. And so the sooner that they know that sure better. Any comments, observations, Hardy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the report's asking for further extension, sort of more funding to be found for this review to happen. But reading between the lines, it doesn't look too good. You know, I want some. I know the review is still continuing, but the fact seems to be that the funding required to continue, even for this quarter, is more than what was originally allocated for this. So does this mean the sort of death knell of our community managed libraries? That's the question I have. It poses to me, this report. And, you know, what does that mean for our local communities who rely on these services, albeit they've not been resourced and been able to be as effective as they could have been based on what I've seen here?
Claire?
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. This report requests further one-off funding to continue the provision of CMLs to the end of March, and this allows consideration of the service, offer and delivery models as part of the annual budget round and agreement of the council tax in February 2023. So we have colleagues working very effectively with key partners and stakeholders, and the information from the review thing can be clearly explained regarding the next steps that are being proposed with the financial implications of those next steps. So, we're very keen to bring that report back with the hindsight of the CML review, and we'll bring that back as a future Cabinet report for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
There is the fear, though, that this is just kicking this into the long grass, and so therefore I reluctantly come forward with a recommendation and see if it gets support from the Executive Scrutiny. Executive Scrutiny recognises the concern and anxiety of the public and those involved in delivering library services in this city. It therefore calls on the Cabinet to inform all those involved about their future intentions as soon as possible, and hopefully well before the end of March next year. Do you have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Mike. Anybody wish to comment? Or, yeah, Nicola?
I appreciate what you're saying, but I think it's important that these reports are carried out effectively. The reality is that we have a statutory libraries in the city. This isn't a I don't want to make political points, but it was something that was CMLs were raised by the previous administration, taken on and carried forward under under the Conservative administration here at the current administration, and they need to evolve. We know that the community managed libraries can't just be about books anymore. It has to evolve to look at the bigger picture, and I think in order to do that, they need time to establish what can be made available within those libraries, and I think that the CMLs themselves need to have that time to be able to give us what they're capable of doing. I think if we rush it, you're likely to end up with a situation that nobody wants. So I think it's a really difficult balancing act, and I agree we all want to keep the libraries open, but the fundamental need for libraries is not just about books, it's about the social need for them, the warm spaces that people are bringing up across the city at the moment, and various other needs. So I just don't want to, I appreciate what you're saying, I just don't want to push it to be a quick answer when actually it might be the one that nobody wants.
I still feel that we need that debate and consideration well before the end of March, so we don't want to just kick this into the long grass and hope for the best. So the recommendation is there. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. 3 against. Okay, that's passed. Have you captured that, Stephen? Thank you very much. Okay, item 16, approval to implement litter bin sensory technology into street litter bins. Simon. Sorry? Your colleague, sorry. Samantha. Thank you.
Thank you. So what this report is about is it's to approve the implementation of sensor technology into our litter bins on streets, parks and open spaces. So technology is used in our industry to maximise efficiency, and that's outlined in section 3.2. And what the technology is itself is a sensor that's installed into our litter bins, and that monitors the fill level of the bin, and it creates an alert when the bin needs emptying. So we have trialled this technology. We've trialled it on 200 streets bins and most recently 30 parks bins. So thinking the 200 on streets, what we used to do with that prior to the sensors is that was the main enhanced workload of the enhanced bin emptying round. And they were essentially on a list where the team would work from bin 1 to bin 2 to bin 3 and go right the way to the bottom and then restart again. And the problem with working like that is until you arrive to each of the bins, you don't know whether they are full or only half full or overflowing. So the technology has moved us away from that, and we now only empty them bins as and when they need emptying. And we've seen a couple of different efficiencies there. So there's some of the bins that have got sensors in now that we empty more frequently than we did before it was fitted with a sensor. So that suggests to us that really them bins spent a lot of their time full and overflowing. And also on the flip side, there's some bins that we now empty less often with a sensor in than we did before. So that suggests to us that we were getting to them a bit too early, and that was an unnecessary trip at that time. And by cutting out them unnecessary trips, it's reduced our visits to bins by 53%. So what we're proposing is to expand this technology into all of the grounds bins, so the round green bins, and a proportion of the streets bins. So the bins that will be covered on the streets in the proposal covers the known higher usage bins, and also all of the bins in areas that have less frequent routine cleansing, so thinking monthly, 6 weekly in your outer areas. And we can review that later down the line. Section 6.1 provides a cost breakdown which is between £76,000 and £80,000 a year, and that has been identified within existing street pride budgets. There's a couple of positive and positive legal and climate implications. So in us reducing our overflowing bins and emptying them bins when they're needed, we're reducing that risk of breaching the rules and regulations set out with the Environmental Protection Act. And also only emptying them bins when they're needed, and also the route optimisation. So not only thinking the best way to get from A to B, but also if there's 50 jobs going down to a team that day. It's putting them in the right order, and it's really optimising that round. And doing that is reducing and decreasing our carbon footprint. Probably last point for me, there's a couple of other implications to consider, which is covered in section 10.1 and 10.2. And that includes that this really for us is a new thing. So we've not tried it and expanded it like this before. So until we do this, we don't know what that demand will be. And also just to consider that if this isn't approved, the bins that have got sensors in now are going to have to be removed, which will put us back to having an increase in complaints for them bins, and also pushing us back to a more scheduled way of working. Lee, am I okay to bring you in just to touch on anything ground specific?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam. So the thinking underpins the grounds maintenance element as well. So as Sam touched on, over all the close to 400 parks and open spaces we have across the city, there's about 609 bins on our parks and open spaces. And much as Sam's just touched on, we travel to these. We service these over a period of a week, some visiting every day, some visiting once a week. And some of these, as the data has shown us, we visit too frequently. So it's wasted journeys, it's wasted fuel, and as Sam's touched on, some of those benefits could be clawed back there, but the thinking is also that it could free up officer time. So if we only collect those bins that are due to be full, that frees up time for litter picking duties, fly tip waste duties as well. So there's some gains to be made there. We did do a survey of our bin condition stock, and it's in relatively good condition, slightly different bins than the street bins. And we costed it out to replace all of the bins to increase the city's park bin capacity will be in the region of £250,000, so not very tenable. So, and we'd still have a relatively inefficient, as good as we can get it with what we've got to work with, but a relatively inefficient collection regime. So by tackling that first, and then as the bins come towards the end of their life, we could replace them with a larger receptacle where it's suitable, and then there's a double buff of increased bin capacity over time. But yeah.
It's a slight aside, but we've been promised probably for the last 10 years larger bins in Darley Park. We haven't seen them yet. Can you find out when we're likely to see them, please? Can you make some inquiries, and then you can come back to me on that? I'd be grateful. Okay, Hardiel, over to you, and then John.
That question applies to Normanton Park as well.
And Spondon.
Yeah. And I think the officers are aware of that. So can I first of all thank the officers for the work they've done, and then bringing this, doing the work, and then bringing this paper forward to implement what will be resource effective and more efficient in using the diminished staffing we have to make sure that we keep our city as clean and tidy as we can. So this will help to do that, and I welcome that. And I also welcome, and I think we as a board should strongly support the work and the innovation from the officers in terms of delivering this. And I propose that we put that into a resolution, Chair, and thank the officers for the work they've done, the innovation they've provided to bring more resource-effective use of our resources and provide a better service for the areas where this will actually make an impact. And the impact will be where high visits were required, but there was overuse, and it's mostly in the outer parts of the city, which is welcome because it will make a better use of our resources. So I welcome that. And the officer did mention that where there's frequent visits, such as the inner city wards, Normanton, where I represent, and other places where there's more litter, and that is not going to be developed there because you do high visits. But I do know, and we did a Better Together partnership event in Normanton area near the Indian Community Centre, and the bins were small. The small bins do make a difference. People want to put it in the bins, but the bins are too small. So we do need to look at that. Can I just confirm with the officers that this implementation is welcome, but can we also look to see how, even where there's frequent visiting, but the bins are too small, they get enlarged? and that the sensor bins are considered there as well, because that will help in the work that's being done. So, but I welcome the fact that the parks will be using them in all their bins. That will make an effective difference, with or without the large bins. So, Chair, I mean, I think we should really support and welcome this innovative work and put that as a proposal on this.
Yeah, Chair. One thing that's been consistent since I first got elected in 2010 is we've never been allowed a new litter bin because we've been told you can't get them collected. So if this is going to result in efficient emptying of bins, which is fantastic, is there any chance that we could go, we could be afforded another bin, maybe even go crazy too, which obviously reduce fly tipping, reduce other waste around the area? I mean, I completely support it, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, be brief as possible. So on 4.7, we're talking about the post-mounted 50 litre capacity bins being assessed, and a fair number of them are going to be replaced by the floor-standing 120 litre capacity bins. Can I just ask, so the ones that remain, the 50 litre bins, then they're not going to get sensors then? They're going to be left without sensors? That's one question. The other one is a little bit more nuanced, but hopefully, whilst I will be focusing on Mickleover, it might be relevant to other wards. I know that a lot of Mickleover bins require very frequent emptying due to us being the largest ward, not only in population, but obviously we've got the bolt-ons, the urban extensions from South Derbyshire now, which link through, mostly not through roads, but with cycleways and pathways. And so we're seeing a very significant footfall into our ward, parks, footpaths, the community facilities. And that's putting really serious pressure, and we've seen it on our litter bins, especially to the west of the ward and probably in places like Devonshire Drive as well. You know, and it does result in the ward councillors, myself and colleagues, having to, during the spring and summer, almost daily monitor some of the bins. And I'm sure that's something which you can recognise in many of your other wards and my colleagues in this chamber. So I certainly welcome sensors, and the results that we've had from the trials in Mickleover, the bins that have had sensors, has been a positive one. It's very rare to have to report as a ward councillor an overflowing bin that has a sensor. It's very, very rare. So that's a real positive thing. Can I just inquire though, the list about the cleansing frequency, I'm a bit confused about, because Mickleover, Littleover, and I think it's Oakwood as 3 wards have a 6-week cleansing regime, when I know that there's the vast majority of bins in Mickleover off, you know, maybe every couple of days some of them have to be emptied. So I'm a bit confused over why those 3 wards are saying 6 weeks, when the reality is that very few bins in any of those wards will have to wait for 6 weeks to be emptied. And then all the other wards in the city are 4 weeks. And I'm just a little bit confused about what that cleansing frequency actually is, because it sounds extremely long for some bins. So they're the 2 areas really that I wanted clarity on, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just echoing, Matt's covered quite a bit of what I was going to say. Those that we have had in Spondon have been successful. Those that we know that haven't had them have been causing some trouble lately. The one thing that I'm sure we'd all love, and I think it's just something to highlight, I don't think it's a right now, but is the recycling element of those bins that are in place, and what we can do in the future with those. I think that's something we need to consider.
She covered one of my points, which was the recycling one. The second is we've got information here about the cost per year of this service. It's going to be found from existing budgets, but we know that existing budgets are really tight. What this doesn't indicate is the level of savings against what we are currently doing in financial terms as well as in organisational potential. And I just feel there may well be further questions around that would be useful to hear.
Thank you very much. So with regards to the park bins, so one of the things we want to really do is encourage residents and visitors to the parks and open spaces to use these bins, because that has a positive knock-on effect of reduced littering and potentially even fly tip waste. So I think we'll treat each one on a case-by-case basis, because what we don't want to be doing is putting litter bins everywhere. One of the benefits of the sensor technology is we can move them ourselves, so we can trial a bin in a given location before we fully commit. But so to answer your question, yes, we'll look at these and then review them on a case-by-case basis by talking to friends groups, the parks and the community.
I think we've got a little bit to add on there. So probably just following on from what Lee said, what we can also do, because we do know that we've got some hotspots there that perhaps is in need of another bin. We've focused a lot of our efforts really over the last year in replacing our bins that have reached the end of their life. What we can do with the sensor technology is to essentially fit a sensor into a temporary bin, and we can move that round and really get the right place before we put jaws into ground, essentially. And that will be really beneficial. Perhaps to just pick up on the other points, so councillor Holmes, post-mounted, floor-mounted bins. So we're not proposing at this stage to put sensors into the smaller capacity bins. What we wanted to try and focus on initially was to increase that capacity wherever we could and phase out them smaller style bins. Where we're seeing bins, picking up the daily bins part, where we're seeing bins that we're visiting every day and they're quite frequent, they're bins for us that we would look at then increasing the capacity even further. And the technology will help us do that. Perhaps just picking up on the cleaning rota for streets. So all of Derby is cleaned, every street in Derby is cleaned at a certain frequency, and that varies from multiple times a day, daily, weekly, monthly, every 6 weeks. And that level is depending on how long it takes to reach a certain standard. So when we're saying 6 weeks for, as an example, Micklover, we're saying that the routine cleansing, so the litter picking, your sweeping, whatever else we do there, is every 6 weeks. Where we've got bins that we know fill up in between that, goes on an enhanced list, so they're emptied in between, which would be really where the sensors make a great efficiency. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, Chair, just wanted to check. Councillor Dinser wanted to propose a recommendation. Do you want me to just read it out and then?
Sorry, Councillor, just read it out, please.
So the Executive Scrutiny Board supports the work of officers and welcomes the innovation that provides a better service and allows for the better use of resources.
Okay, could I have a second for that, please? Second, all those in favour? Yeah, that's passed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm assuming we're in extra time now. The Q2 report reflects the very challenging conditions that local government services are being delivered in the current macroeconomic climate, increasing demand in the city, and the impact of especially inflation on some of our services including those purchased from other parties. The report does detail that there's been a 2 million increase in the projected overspend, and confirms some of the areas highlighted in Q1, such as the projected additional cost of a pay award that has now been confirmed and is being paid this month, in terms of inflation increases accounting for approximately between 40 and 50% of the increase in budgets, and some of the areas where we are seeing increased demand. The report details a series of mitigations that we have to try and manage the spend, and they're carrying on from the previous year, such as demand management, spending review panels, maximising income, collection, and a wide variety of actions. And just to, again, assist executive scrutiny, we have seen over recent years increases in demand and in some cases a lack of sufficiency in the market. But last year you were able to put 2.2 million into reserves, the previous 5.3 million in reserves. So that shows a track record in a normal environment of being able to manage that budget within year. I think if I was to look at across local government, the ability for us to forecast with certainty that the need and inflationary pressures can be fully mitigated solely by our own actions is less certain than it ever has been previously. The Chair has mentioned the autumn statement, which is going to be made on Thursday, which again will give us an indication of the future funding for local government, but the situation remains very challenging. So in the report we detail the things that have changed, such as we are forecasting a slightly reduced level of savings that can be delivered in this year. That is due to both cost pressures and also capacity issues. It details some slippage on the capital programme to accommodate changes in the funding. That's especially around the Transforming Cities project. It details continuing pressures on the dedicated schools grant arising from children with education healthcare plans, both in the DSG and also in home to school transport. It also details that if the overspend cannot be mitigated, there would be a call on reserves which would almost eliminate our budget risk reserve. So this is a report which hopefully gives you the clarity to scrutiny, scrutinise for budget, but also is a very honest reflection of our current financial position, which I have to say is being replicated right across the country in terms of in-year overspends and very challenging budget setting that we'll be all doing in February next year. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any comments or observations? Hardiel and Lucy. Again, I've asked you to be as succinct as possible. Thank you.
I mean, I think the situation is dire right across the country. Can I just clarify, Simon, in terms of the overspends and then the reserves? If the overspends, no other funds are available or they're reduced, have we got enough reserves left to meet the overspend?
I have a host of questions, but I'm going to resist asking them, and I shall come direct to you if I may, after the meeting. But there were 2 points I will raise, which I would like a wider range of officers and members to hear. One is there's a graph showing how our use of road fuels has now gone up to where we were pre-COVID, and I'm presuming that we've actually got more electric vehicles being used than before. So it sounds as though we're not going in the right direction against our aspirations to reduce private car use and move towards more sustainable means of travel. So I think we just need to, I just feel that the time has maybe come to actually look at a strategy as to how we deal with that, and if we, assuming we haven't got one already, and pick that up as a potential action point in future. And the second point is that there's discussion here both about the foster care teams, and that I think the foster care team is actually working quite well at recruiting additional people, but very similar in terms of welcoming people who aren't part of your household into your home are the shared lives team. And I think there might be some synergy between those two teams, which can both help in their own ways. And I just want to make sure that those two teams are working together, and people who may not be assessed satisfactorily as a foster carer might find that they have a role as a shared lives carer. And if we haven't got close enough working, we might be missing out on some of those opportunities. So I just want to make sure that that is happening.
Thank you, Lucy. So 2 issues. Hardiel, what if we run out of money, then what? And secondly, Lucy's comments about electrical vehicles and the foster care team, about the two teams working together. Simon.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Dinser, we often split our reserves into a general fund reserve, a budget risk reserve, which is effectively a medium-term financial smoothing reserve, and then earmark reserves, which are set aside for specific purposes. So we still have reserves of over £60 million in total. 60 million in total. I haven't got the figure here, but it's in. But our general fund reserve is just 9 million that we want to retain. And the budget risk reserve at the beginning of this year was around 20 million. If this scenario plays out and we're trying to minimise the overspend this year, the budget risk reserve, which is a smoothing reserve, will be almost exhausted, but not over exhausted. So this is, and we shouldn't underestimate, a very serious position of, as a council for many years, and whatever political colour, the level of reserves in Derby and most unitary councils are quite low. And when you have a shock, like we've seen in the national position, then our ability to smooth it through reserves is very limited. But as I explained earlier, in the past 2 years where we were seeing the impact of COVID, the impact of other changes, we were able to balance our budget and contribute to reserves. So the principles of financial management are there, but the extraordinary circumstances means that we'll be drawing down reserves, and by implication that leaves us more exposed than we would like, because then once those reserves are used, we don't have them to support us going forward. So it is a very challenging position, as I said. And then just picking up Councillor Kerr's point, she mentioned the fuel usage and costs. Obviously, the years 2020 to 21, 21, 22, we had to adjust our fleet utilisation in response to COVID and other aspects. So you probably got a couple of atypical years in 2021, 21, 22. We have invested in, especially an electric fleet for the small fleet. And again, the intention is over time and when the infrastructure allows to expand that more. But our Street Pride colleagues can give you more details on that as required. And absolutely, Councillor Kerr, our foster care team is a really good team in terms of both stability and also meeting the needs of young people where we can in the city. And the shared lives carer type approach, we have seen a decrease in shared lives uptake in recent years. But the two go almost alongside each other, as I think you were implying, around this is all about creating stability for young people who we have taken into our responsibility as a corporate parent. So hopefully that answers both questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I'll take one more. No one else indicated. Nicola, and then we'll move on to the next item. Nicola.
Sorry, Chair, just to say thanks again to the work of the finance team. It is not the easiest time for anybody at the moment, and they are doing an incredible job, and as are all the officers and all the council leadership team. It's not easy.
I did say, Lisa, that was the last one, but very, very quickly then.
One very defined question. What is the purpose of the PFI reserves?
What is the purpose, Simon?
So the PFI reserve is that you have contractual commitments arising from the PFI contract. In order, and a lot of those will be at the time when you replace life cycle replacements, maybe boilers after 15 years or whatever, so it's not an even flow of when you have to spend money. So what we do is we equalise it over the period of time. So in the first, say, 10 years, we're putting money into reserve to meet future liabilities. So there's approximately £29 million in the PFI reserve, but by the end of the contract, that is going to have to be spent on the PFI contract. So it's a smoothing reserve over a period, because in years 1 and 2, you probably don't have to pay a lot towards replacement equipment or anything else.
Thank you, Simon.
Does that include the schools PFIs and the street lighting PFIs? Have we got other PFIs as well?
Schools PFI, housing PFI, street lighting PFI, there's about 5. It's detailed in our statement of accounts. That's okay.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 18. Who's taking us through that? Simon.
So this is a financial procedure standard report we have. There's 2 elements to it. One is in respect of introducing a chatbot system to Derby City Council and Derby Homes. This is using the benefits of automation, artificial intelligence and other technology to try and help people's issues be resolved through 24/7 through the use of the technology. Again, this is about modernising our council and improving access. There will always be the chance for people always to speak to a human being, but if you speak to your bank and you speak to the gas company, this is becoming more and more common. The second area that we're asking you to note and to sort of approve is in submission for a bid for up to 0.6 million for supported housing improvement funding. And this is for unregulated use of supported exempt accommodation. This is a growing pressure on the council where this can be recovered through housing benefit, and it's a link between the accommodation and the support provided. I think if we're to be absolutely honest, that we want to make sure that the quality of support and housing provision meets the needs of these vulnerable people, and that they are able to support their tenancy, and that landlords are providing an appropriate level of service. I think if we've got to be honest, we are not convinced across the board that that is happening in all supported tenancies. So this is about getting government funding to help us create a better framework around it. I know Ian Fuller is here if you've got any more detailed questions.
Thank you, Simon. Are there any comments or observations, Lucy?
I very much welcome both of these, but regarding the chatbot, there's a comment here in terms of the climate implications that they'll be reviewed as appropriate in each circumstance. So people often forget that our IT carbon footprint is getting bigger and bigger the more we use it. Whenever we access a website somewhere else, or even our own, there are energy implications, and it depends where your server is and so on as to what that carbon footprint is. I don't know if we know what our carbon footprint is for our IT operations, but this will add to it. It may save in other ways, but I think it's a bit, to say we're going to review it later is a bit not embracing the challenge that we have in front of us as much as we might.
Okay, so any comments, Simon?
Obviously, we do try and assess both our direct and indirect carbon footprints. I think Councillor Kerr is aware that data centres are incredibly hungry in terms of their energy use, and we encourage our suppliers to mitigate that as much as possible. But I think the gain that we get through wider access to people being able to deal 24/7, we also have to sort of maximise that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, moving on to item 19, Q2 Performance Monitoring Report. Sarah Walker. Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is, again, a standard report that is considered by the committee each quarter. It goes up to the end of September 2022. It is the first complete monitoring report that we have this year against the annual council delivery plan. So it does provide an update on our priority performance measures and our milestones, which we were not in a position to report in the Q1 report. The format of the report remains consistent with that we've considered previously, really looking at how the commitments that we've made and also our strategic risks are impacting on delivery of outcomes for the city. As with the recovery plan that we had in place last year, at the point of approving the document, Cabinet colleagues committed to making a dynamic document, ensuring it remained fit for purpose, particularly in the complex and changing landscape that we're working within. So set out within paragraph 4.5 are a number of proposed amendments to the plan and subsequent monitoring. This covers definition amendments, target amendments, a small number of measures and milestones to be deleted, and the inclusion of a new milestone. So in summary, at the end of September, 71% of our quarterly performance measures that had a target had met or exceeded them. 75% of measures were forecasted to achieve their annual target. This includes some areas that didn't have a quarterly target. We have completed 5 milestones at the end of Q2, and key achievements are presented in paragraphs 4.8 to 4.9, with a full overview of activity set out in Appendix 1. 79% of our priority projects are assessed as either green or amber green. And at the end of September, we had 18 strategic risks on our strategic risk register. So in terms of key risk changes, we have had 1 new risk added, which was the potential risk of industrial action regarding the NGC pay claim, which has an update obviously presented within the appendix. That has been resolved. And we had 2 risks proposed for de-escalation to a directorate and department level risk registers. They were the localised outbreak of COVID-19 and diminished outcomes for Derby's children and young people, which was a risk that specifically related to COVID, and we're obviously now getting updated attainment outcomes. 2 risk scores have been reduced over the last quarter, project management governance and our ability to meet statutory duties for accommodation-based support for domestic abuse. Overall, in terms of areas of challenge relating to our performance, they've been articulated predominantly through our strategic risks and are in line with some of the challenges that we're seeing from a capacity and budget pressure perspective. So we have seen an increase in the total number of working days lost due to sickness absence. There are no performance measures recommended for consideration via a performance surgery or risks for consideration via a risk surgery. And the report does detail an update on those measures that are read in terms of the context and some in-quarter performance and improvement activity that has been delivered. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very comprehensive report. Lucy and then Mike, if you can be very succinct. Thank you.
2 questions, please. Clarification, first of all, they're both within paragraph 4.8 and towards the bottom of that, so 3 bullet points up from the bottom. It says the total number of homelessness approaches since April 2022 was 1,300, which is nearly 10% drop from the end of June 22 to the end of September. I can't work the dates and the meaning of that sentence, I'm afraid. And the second question was going to be asking about the, sorry, it's next page, about the lost working days, 4.10. And really, I suppose, what we are doing, there's obviously comments here on a number of support we're trying to give to people. But are we doing any research to try and identify whether there are any common factors relating to the people who are needing time off, whether there's, I don't know, I just feel it's an area that's clearly impacting on colleagues. When somebody is off, the other colleagues have got additional burden, and if there's anything more that we can do to manage that situation, maybe it's home working, I don't know, but just a bit more on that one.
Thank you, Chair. I think Lucy might have just touched on this. This isn't a question, I'm not expecting it to be answered, but I would like officers and the Cabinet to be aware that paragraph 410 is talking about our increased sickness absentees rate, and it's going up. we passed at Personnel Committee a new attendance management policy. Now, I know it's early days, but it doesn't look as if it's working to me, Chair. And I'm worried because when people are off, it puts more strain on the rest, and that could cause them to go off. And I'm wondering if we're getting into a vicious circle. It's still going up, and it's unsustainable level. It's going up to about 12-man days now. And I just want to raise that point, and hope that everybody knows that we have a real problem with sickness absenteeism.
Thanks, Chair. Just really a response to Councillor Kerr's comment. We do have a personnel committee, and these issues are raised regularly at the personnel committee, and we monitor all of these things. And as Mike alluded to, we have just passed a new attendance policy for the council at the personnel committee.
Yeah, of course, Chair. In relation to the bullet under paragraph 4.8, I apologise for the confusion on that. So we've had 1,300 homelessness approaches so far cumulatively from April to the end of September. We saw the 10% drop between Q1 and Q2, which is from the end of June to the end of September. So we are seeing over that period a slight decline in approaches that was reported. In terms of the sickness absence, we are doing a deep dive performance review on that at present. So that is obviously picking up on a number of the different aspects that councillors have raised. So that is in progress.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, moving on to item 20, exclusion of the press and public. Under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, I could ask for the public gallery upstairs, if you could vacate, please. Any press and public here? Is it officer, is it? Yeah, officer, yeah, okay. I think we are actually clear.